AM 560, The Answer.
Dan and Amy, we talked about the marijuana legalization that Governor Spalding is advancing through the General Assembly, and they're trying to move on it post-haste. Bill that's 300 pages long, as the Chicago Tribune opines, suggests that bill that long and that's that complicated, that has such potential consequences as so experienced and debated in states that have legalized marijuana like Washington and Colorado. Maybe you should slow down a little bit and let's hash some of this out, so to speak. Part of our concern, the Tribune writes, is that elected officials are so attracted to legal pot as a new source of tax revenue that they're already counting the money instead of considering the consequences. Now, this from an editorial board that supports medical marijuana, supports the decriminalization, and is inclined to support legalization, but wants the process to be more thoughtful. Well, if they want the process to be more thoughtful,
Please.
They came to the wrong General Assembly, because that's not going to happen. But we can be thoughtful here. We can actually discuss some of these interesting aspects of the legislation and the philosophy behind it. For example, we're going to legalize marijuana, and we're going to use the tax revenue from marijuana to support local law enforcement, who is then going to be charged with arresting people committing crimes associated with drug use.
Or the revenue's going to go to addiction centers to help people get off the thing that we're trying to hook them onto
Right.
in the first place.
Yeah, there's some curiousness to the proposal, but it's not unusual. It's the same thing with state-run gambling, the lottery, especially, which is effectively works out as a regressive tax on the poor. Predatory government aligned against the interests of its residents, because all the residents are subjects that exist to generate revenue for the state, and that's the way that the political class in this state looks at it. But it's not the way everybody looks at it. Alex Berenson is a former New York Times reporter. He's also the author of the book Tell Your Children: The Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence, and he's got a recent piece in the Wall Street Journal that could inform our General Assembly if they were capable of being informed. Alex, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So the piece in the Journal, Weeding Out Dubious Marijuana Science, we've talked about this before, including with you, about the spike in emergency room visits in Colorado, about the increase in substance-related traffic accidents in Colorado, some of the studies that have been done. But this is sort of given short shrift by the proponents of legalization by comparing it to drunk driving and the alcohol use, and otherwise suggesting that there's just not enough evidence that we have at this point to make definitive conclusions about what the world with marijuana being a legal consumer product will look like.
Yeah, that's true. It's actually much worse than that. And my book really focuses on one major impact of marijuana risk or marijuana use, which is psychosis, and then the violence that is associated with psychosis. I actually, to be honest, when I wrote the book, which was last year and the year before, I really wasn't aware of how bad the driving data is. That in Colorado and Washington, driving deaths are up about 30%. Post-legalization. And even if you adjust for the fact that those states have grown a little bit faster than the population, and that, people driving is up a little bit there compared to the national population, it's still up much more. And what's happened is that for reasons that I honestly don't understand, I don't know if they're ideological, I don't know if they're financial, I suspect more ideological than financial. The professoriate, the academic left, which is, unfortunately most of academia is not ideologically balanced, which I think we can all agree, whether we're on the left or the right, a more balanced academia would be a good thing. The academic left doesn't want to deal with the reality here. And so they come up with a lot of studies that essentially throw out the top line data, the real data. And they look at county level data over a period of months, or they look at, non-fatal accidents, or they look at all kinds of stuff, and then they use it to say, well, if we squint really hard and we twist the data really crazily, we can say that we can't say that marijuana is better. You can't get there, okay? But what you can say is there's not proof that cannabis is causing any of this. So therefore, we say that legalization hasn't produced any negative effects. And to me, this is a crazy way to look at this. Okay, there are real people dying in real accidents, and the presumption should be that introducing this substance, which we know impairs cognition and we know in some cases makes people psychotic, might be responsible for that. So prove to me it's not. Don't say to me, if I do X, Y, and Z, it looks like maybe I can make some of this increase go away. And there's an academic at the University of Oregon named Ben Hansen who is particularly guilty of this. And that's why I'm naming him, because I don't think that people should be allowed to do this when there are real lives on the line.
Wow. So what do you suggest that you tell your kids about the legalization of marijuana? Because right now, and when we were growing up, it was not legal, and it's still a banned substance. But I have teenage children. Dan has fictitious children that he likes to pretend they're his.
Yes.
But what do we tell our kids?
I think you tell them that, assuming that it is legalized in Illinois, and we'll see. I mean, it hasn't happened in New York and New Jersey, which are the states I know the best. And those are obviously blue states that are pretty money hungry too. So maybe it won't happen in Illinois. But if it does happen, I would say, you say to them, look, this just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe. Alcohol is legal, and that's not a great idea for kids. Tobacco is legal, and that kills people. So just know that governments have a lot of reasons to make something legal or not that have nothing to do with its safety. So I would start with that.
Well, right, and the irony in Illinois is, as we're advancing the marijuana legalization legislation, the General Assembly and the governor just signed legislation to increase the smoking age to 21 from 18.
Right.
So I mean, it's bizarre.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
But to me that speaks to. I mean, I know you said this is more ideological than financial in some respects, and that seems to me an example of this being ideology, this being sort of genuflecting at the altar of marijuana, which is an odd thing to do, but it seems that that's the case in certain quarters.
I absolutely agree. And what I don't understand about this is there's a perfectly reasonable argument from the right to legalize marijuana, right? Which is basically a libertarian argument.
Mm-hmm.
This is your body, and as long as you use it in a way that's not harmful to other people, you don't get into a car accident, you don't hurt somebody, so be it. Okay, but the argument that this is somehow medicine, that we're going to do this pretending that this is good for the population as a whole, is what really upsets me, because it is so clearly untrue. And we now have real data from real states with real people dying that is simply being ignored. And I mean, if the government of Illinois, if the governor of Illinois or the governor of New York wants to say, and it's funny because these are nanny states, but if they want to say, in this case we buy the libertarian argument and we think we'll make a little bit extra money from it, but there's going to be problems, so be it. That's a legitimate argument. But to pretend that this is a positive somehow is just bizarre.
In your piece, though, now to again offer some support for the legalization crowd, this may be the most important study, at least for a certain demographic. A paper published in March, academic paper, that cannabis increases the incidence of satisfactory orgasms for women. And so I think you just flipped Amy.
What?
There you go. No, I mean, people believe it's an aphrodisiac. It certainly, it enhances sensation, so you would think it would be good for sex. And that's fine, that's great, but, that's not I'm sorry, my daughter is yelling at me.
Oh, sure, probably about my question.
Yeah,
probably offended by my question in your op-ed. Yeah.
By the way, that study, it's funny because that was an example. The piece as a whole was about how bad a lot of the research is, and that research is a classic example of it because this study was reported in various online sites as, marijuana is really great for sex and for women. They didn't actually compare women who don't use marijuana to women who do. So what they compared was people who smoke all the time and didn't smoke before having sex this time to people who smoke all the time and did smoke before having sex. So maybe if you're in withdrawal or something, you're less likely to have a satisfactory orgasm. But I'm not joking. That's the quality of a lot of this research.
So it's interesting because the paper in question is not only nihilistic, it's bad science. So it's a nihilistic argument predicated on bad science. That's an interesting twofer. I mean, that's not easy to do.
Well, it turns out it is pretty easy to do if you look at a lot of the social science research around marijuana. It's amazing to me how bad it is.
And the response from, again, the pro-legalization side is, say, the libertarian argument and also the science argument is, look, if you use marijuana in moderation, just like alcohol in moderation, a glass of wine with dinner sort of thing, I guess a joint after dinner sort of thing, then what's the big deal? Why are you being a nattering nabob? This is, you can do that and enjoy yourself and not have any deleterious health effects and stop getting into my business.
Yes, and look, there's some truth in that, okay? But the problem is that when you introduce an addictive substance to people, and marijuana is addictive, make no mistake, there's going to be some people who can't use it responsibly. And unfortunately, it looks like actually with marijuana, there's more people who can't use it responsibly than people who can't use alcohol responsibly. Because most people who use alcohol use it the way you're talking about. Most Americans drink, and most Americans drink very moderately. Most people who use cannabis, not most, but a significant number of the people who use cannabis smoke every day. And a lot of those people smoke all day, every day. So there's 40 million people who use cannabis, and 8 million of them use every day. And a lot of those people are, quote unquote, wake and bakers. They're using all day, every day. This is a dangerous drug.
Alex Berenson.
Legalize it
I'm
on
sorry.
that basis.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Anyway,
finish. Go ahead. Finish to legalize on that basis. Yeah.
Legalize it on that basis if you're going to legalize it. And that's really what Tell Your Children's all about. Just know what the risks are here.
He is Alex Berenson, former New York Times reporter. His book, Tell Your Children, The Truth About Marijuana, Mental Illness, and Violence, and his piece in the Wall Street Journal, Weeding Out Dubious Marijuana Science. Nice headline writer there. Alex, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Take care. He joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Golf with AM 560 on Monday, June 24th at our annual golf outing to support the families of fallen first responders. Call 312-363-66.